There's certainly been moments that people told me would feel transformative, but in the end, they had all felt inauthentic, staged, or worst of all, like a normal day. Something had to be done. So that's why I'm hiring you, a stranger, to kidnap me when I'm least expecting and drop me off in the middle of nowhere.
All right, we are back on Play It Forward. Today we got Will Sonheim. He is filmmaker, writer, director, and editor. Very, very tight editor. The film we'll be talking today is Rite of Passage. Will, thank you so much for being on the show today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Yeah, I had a sweaty bike ride on my way to top on this call, but I've dried off so I'm in kind of a perfect
Perfect,
headspace.
like perfect moisture space.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah. The humidity, I've dialed it just right for the call.
Awesome, awesome. Well, you're primed, ready to go. The film we'll be talking about today is Rite of Passage. And before we start talking about the movie, which you also not only wrote, directed, and edited, but you acted in, and you produced. So, like true indie filmmaker, you did it all. It's a great film, really explores a really nice subject in a unique way. Before we begin, do you mind introducing yourself a little bit and maybe setting up the film after that?
Yeah, yeah, sounds good. Yeah, my name is Will Sonheim. I'm based in Chicago. I've been working in film and theater here for about a decade now, and have kind of been lucky enough to be involved in all different aspects of it. I studied film and improv in college, so I think my way into theater was through comedy and sketch and long form improvisational. So getting a single suggestion from the audience and then creating, 20, 25-minute pieces with an ensemble. So that idea of experimental, weird, absurd, goofy creation, it feels in my creative DNA and in the spirit, I think, of Chicago, that I think Chicago as a city really fosters. Um, so yeah, while being in Chicago, I've done all sorts of video production from the more corporate side to the more experimental or creative in terms of short films, music videos. I also worked a little bit in film distribution for a company called Music Box Films, which is a small I don't know why I said small. Sometimes I default to using diminutives, my little project, but it's a perfectly fine sized film distribution company.
It's all
Um,
relative.
it's
Yeah.
all relative. Yeah. And the scale of the universe, it's a tiny film
Right.
distribution
Yeah.
company.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, so got to work on kind of the marketing and publicity side of that. Um, and then spent a year in London getting a master's in screenwriting. And currently I'm a freelance filmmaker, so I make my living as an editor, and I teach a filmmaking class at Medill, which is a journalism branch of Northwestern. Um, and so kind of all of that to say is that some or not all of that was sort of the soup that I was swimming in
Sure.
when I came up with the idea of this project. Um, the movie Rite of Passage starts with an event videographer, and at the time, that's a lot of what I was doing. I was doing live stream Shabbat services for a local Jewish congregation. I was uh, sort of doing whatever I could get my hands on, and starting, I think, to wrestle with bigger existential questions on top of trying to make a living as a filmmaker and an artist. And so I was
What
interested in. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, you must
Please
have been
tell me.
paying attention at some of the sermons,
Yeah, yeah. No, it's the Torah
wrestling with,
portion was always really was
right.
always really helpful.
That
Yeah,
brings up the existential bigger questions.
and I think honestly part of that I grew up. I was raised in the Methodist church, and so I grew up with having, daily religious readings and spiritual readings. But what was new for me and that I loved uh, at these Shabbat services was anytime I would be at a B mitzvah, so, a bar bat mitzvah for someone, it was, there would always be this moment of a 13-year-old person addressing the whole, the congregation about a big question of doing that kind of wrestling. And there was not a dissonance, but it was always sort of funny to me, of being when you're filming something, there's that inherent distance and separation, and you're an observer. And I think I just started sort of sometimes daydreaming during those moments of thinking about my experience as, I think, that at that time, a 30-year-old man learning a lot from these 13-year-old people, who are asking these big questions, and thinking about those rites of passage, right? What are those big moments in your life, and what happens when some of sort of the culturally given ones that we know of have passed us by, and we're left to make meaning of our own lives and to be the storytellers of our own lives, and what kinds of inspiration and anxiety come from that space.
So the character that you play, thanks for that setup. The character that
Mhm.
you play is, a guy who you sounds like we're very close to, a guy who you may have been at one point in time. And
Kind of an idiot, kind of a clown, I
well,
think.
well, I would not have said that. I would just said, a very relatable character, and the character is someone who is just like, when is that definitive period of manhood or adulthood, or
Mhm.
which is what a rite of passage is, right? And you kind of borrow all these themes and ideas from the cultural context that we're semi-familiar with, whether that's
Mhm.
bar mitzvah or a Native American ritual or whatever it might have been. And there's some idea of that there's a trial. There's some
Mhm.
sort of trial that has to be there, and there's some sort of ordeal, and there's the leading up to the ordeal, there's the ordeal, and then there's the resolution of the ordeal, right? And in our modern day and age, it's hard to say like we're not initiated. We're not initiated in any way. I mean, I don't know if like I never was a frat guy, but I mean, those things are horrible, and I don't know if those things are really initiations into a greater context of our identity, right?
Mhm.
And that's the whole kind of thing of a rite of passage. We are somehow taken from this adolescent state of awareness to a bigger context that is heavy, right? And so this
Mhm.
character feels the need to connect with something massive, some grounded energy, something tribal, biblical, whatever it may be, to feel the fullness of being alive, right?
Mhm.
And in the
Yeah, yeah.
meantime, you just, you're going through the motions. So this guy does, if I could say is it all right if I give it away
Yeah.
or to a certain, so he
Oh,
puts
yeah,
out
yeah.
this, he puts out this request. I don't know if it was, through some social media platform, but he hires somebody to kidnap him and to drop him off because he understands that there has to be a suffering, there has to be an ordeal, there has to be a challenge, and you have to rely on yourself to overcome this thing. So he hires somebody, a very nice guy who may have well have given him a map, but he drops him off. He helps him out of the car trunk. He's got a bag over his head. Anyway, he gives him a lunch or some snacks and sets him off in the middle of he doesn't know where. And the idea is that, well, here we are. We're going to try to find our way through, and it's a very here I am lost to found kind of
Mhm.
process that this guy's got to go through. And so in the process, he has an ordeal. It was a very unexpected, not something he kind of set out to do. It could have happened anywhere. It could have been in the living room of his home. It could have been anywhere. And so while he goes through that near death experience, he is transformed, and he is kind of helped along the journey through character he meets to transformation. So we've talked a little bit about like the kind of milieu that you were swimming in, but the real heart of like, hey, I am Will Sonheim, and I want to make this film to explore what does it mean to become whatever it feels good to you or true to you, adult man, universal human, whatever energy, whatever the word is. Where did that live in you? That was like, I am gonna explore this idea of rite of passage.
Yeah, that's a great question, and thank you for, yeah, a great setup. I You should do more of these. You should do more.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Thanks.
Uh, yeah, I think it was. I mean, it was sort of exactly that of wondering how to make a short film that's about about all of those big ideas, but tell it in a human way. And one way I think that I wanted to play with that was have a character who maybe has a hard time letting go of control. Um, in the sense that I think part of my way into this idea of a rite of passage, I'll kind of zig and come back to it, comes from spending a year studying storytelling and studying writers like Joseph Campbell and thinking about, the
Yeah.
hero's journey,
It's
right? So
awesome.
stages
Right. Sure.
that we've
Yeah.
referenced.
Yeah.
Um, and when you read those, I think you both have the experience of feeling connected to these more universal truths or feelings, and um, having this sort of awe-inspiring sense of people have been telling these stories that have been grappling with the same ideas since as long as people have been telling stories. Um, so both holding that in one hand and then also uh, having someone who, instead of maybe engaging with that on a spiritual level, is sort of treating it like a literal checklist, right? Like he writes the hero's journey on his arm, right? And is crossing things off as he goes through them. Um, and so in that soup, I think is also interested in the idea of what happens when you have experiences that feel like a rite of passage or are visceral or feel like a transformative moment, and then the frustration when, as is sort of happening with me right now, when language immediately fails you, when the act of trying to then communicate this transformative, sort of yeah, transcendent experience. Um, as soon as I was interested in the moment of, as soon as you start talking about it, it starts feeling forced, or you feel the frustration, the very human frustration of not being able to capture, the feeling of, no, I was alone in the woods at night and I felt at one with everything. It's like that
Right.
is
Yeah. Yeah.
such a language is so limited in really
Right. Well,
describing those things.
it reminds me of the Tao Te Ching, and then there's a passage that says, "Those who know do not speak; those who speak do not know."
Mhm. Yeah. No, and I think, yeah, I love that. A big inspiration to me too was George Saunders' book, A Swim in the Pond in the Rain,
I don't know it.
which is he's writing about Russian literature, but there are a few moments where he really uses sort of a Zen philosophy to think about the act of creation and the act of writing.
Mm.
And one thing he talks about is sort of I think, a cone or a parable of someone pointing at the moon
Mm. Yeah.
and mixing up the finger for the experience of seeing the
Right.
moon.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and that resonated so strongly with me as someone I can get so excited about the finger. I can get, and as I think as a filmmaker and as a writer and a storyteller and an artist, you have to also think about, like, how am I going to get people to see the moon? What way should I point? How should I light my finger? How should I edit the finger that's pointing at the moon? But you have to keep reminding yourself that that isn't the moon. So I was interested in telling in literally embodying and playing a character
Yeah.
who is a little obsessed with if he's pointing in the right way, and is missing out on the world that is very much alive and open to him having, a rite of
Yeah.
passage or an experience at any moment. And so I think the character you mentioned, who, checks the box of the mentor who shows up, this park ranger who offers him a ritual. In my mind, it was less the ritual itself as some, magic answer that could provide, sort of a cookie cutter experience for him. And it's more the sense of, he, after sort of his failure to articulate this transcendent moment that he has, uh, the answer is actually in other people and in community and in letting go of his plan and in letting go of control and of sort of just throwing himself into something before needing, to have a book a literal guidebook with him that is
Yeah.
telling him how to do everything.
Yeah.
That's a very long-winded answer,
No,
but
no,
yeah,
man, I totally get it. I think it's wonderful and it's beautiful, and I think it's something that, is universally we can all connect to and struggle with. I mean, we have to go through our day-to-day lives in roles. We have
mhm,
certain roles, whether it's, talk show, whatever, interviewer, or, guest or host, and it's and they can be confining and they're limited. They're limited. And so I think that's a key word. And for me as a viewer, watching the film, when he does meet the guru, and he helps him to unlock his limitlessness, metaphorically, and it's, done in a way that we get a great shot of your tuchus.
yeah,
And it's a funny shot, but it's a great moment, it's a great moment when, your butt cheeks are bouncing in the wind, and, you have the vista of nature and those birds are coming across, migrating. It's all natural. That connection with nature is what is really felt and was felt by me. And I think, the meaning and the message is, how do we transcend the roles, our conditioning from early childhood to fit in socially, and then to survive or succeed, or in whatever success might look like, and then to be free and to connect with a feeling of freedom and an energy that is like the creative source,
mhm,
something greater than ourselves. How do we do that?
mhm,
And often it is through a rite of passage, and traditionally has been. Certainly, a lot of tribal cultures seem to have nailed that in a certain way. And at least in my understanding of the mythology, I'm sure a lot of tribal cultures did not. I think warfare was also a
mhm,
traditional, thing amongst people. But there are certainly a lot of tribal cultures that are connected to the earth, and they have certain rituals, and we try to emulate those, whether they're through psychedelics or other means. But the truest passage into the transcendent comes from our own release of our own limitations of who we think we are.
mhm.
Um, so that's kind of the meaning that I get out of watching it. And what about you, where you are now today, having, studied this subject, having made a film and really immersed yourself in it? When you watch the movie, what touches you in terms of, yeah, that's what it means to me today?
Yeah, that's a great question. On one very practical, uh, maybe practical is absolutely the wrong word, but on on one sort of logistical level, I think what the movie, a feeling I get anytime I watch it is a reminder to, if at all possible, try to work at a certain cadence and speed. Try to work quickly to tell when you have an idea, try to make that idea as close to having it as you can. In the sense where in when I rewatch the film now, I wouldn't have made this film, and I'm so glad this film exists. Like, so I made it in the midst of a lot of these real questions, and I still feel that, but I would have, the movie I would make from what, the soup that I called it would
Got
be a
it.
totally different movie
Sure,
now. So
sure.
one of the feelings I have is I'm so grateful that I made this in the spring of 2021, coming out of the pandemic, coming out of having worked on a TV show intensively for maybe spring 2022, but having like I made it on this very specific point in my life. Um, the
So
other feeling,
making the art close to the point of inspiration.
yeah, and I think trusting yourself to smooth things out and not being too precious with an idea. You can be, I think, precious and specific and really intentional with how you're making something, but not pumping the brakes because you don't feel ready to tell a particular story. I think
Oh,
start
yeah,
trying to tell it.
I like that.
Um, I it's also, I mean, I said this, sort of jokingly. I was like, this character is kind of an idiot. And I meant it with love, and I meant it in terms of sort of the performance style of clowning, of, you know, a wholehearted, earnest character who's committing to something, and we're watching through the failure, we're seeing both humor and real, you know, meaning emerge right at kind of the moment of failure or total vulnerability. But one thing I think I learned in making it was earlier, because I was wearing multiple hats, right, and was, you know, performing. So I was watching myself on screen as I edited myself, and was also working with the script that I had written, right? And the experience, a thing I think about now when I revisit or talk about it with people is uh there were so many, almost all earlier drafts came with a degree of judgment for the character of myself that I had created, that I, as the filmmaker, had to let go of in order for the film to have the feeling that it has now. So that, and
Are you talking about judgment for your acting or judgment for what? Or
probably a little bit,
writing?
but
Yeah.
more even judgment for the character, and that the ending, so many versions of the script, the version that we shot, originally it was going, you know, it ends with this funny and sort of, you know, joyful, you know, stripping sprint into the lake, or into the river, which was, I think, the first image that I had in my mind, and then worked kind of backwards from that to make the story around that, of how do we get someone to a place where they, you know, they're running naked into the water, and what does that mean? um but in all the earlier versions, it was either edited or written or cut in a way where then there was narration, and it jumped from me to the park ranger, and we go inside of his head. um and the way that I cut the ending was that I kept trying to undercut the final moment in almost
Mm.
every edit except the final one. I kept trying to kind of take the air out right at the end,
So you
or
had to
sort of
commit
pull the
to
rug
it.
out.
You had to commit to it, and you were kind of shy or embarrassed, or there's some hesitation. Is that
It
what I'm
felt,
sensing?
yeah, it felt like a lack of generosity or kindness for the character of myself that I had created, where
Mhm.
I didn't think that he had deserved that moment. I still
Yeah.
felt that he was trying to force it. And
Uh-huh.
getting
Uh-huh.
notes from my
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
friends, you know,
Uh-huh.
who are all really
Uh-huh.
talented, and
Huh.
the feedback that I kept getting was sort of this thing, which it ends on, is like, he doesn't have to earn it. He doesn't, you know, and
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
goes through all this suffering, and
Uh-huh.
that's
Uh-huh.
the reason he's able to experience. But
You, you,
why not let him have this moment? He's
well,
the
yeah.
protagonist.
Yeah.
He's,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. No, I think
It
it's
was
great.
really kind of a powerful moment for me in editing it, where I was like, oh, I let
Release
him
it.
have a good day. Yeah, let him
Yeah.
release it. Yeah.
No, it's great, man. And I can see that struggle in terms of in you and then in the artwork, and how that ultimately helps you overcome the struggles you face in your own life. And when I first stepped away from the film, the sort of the genre I would put it in is man's search for meaning. I mean, ultimately
Mhm.
that's what it is. And then there's that thing that we didn't talk about, truth. And I'm sorry, it wasn't truth it was trust. That's the
Mm.
word, trust. And so now you're talking about this idea of trust and trusting the character and allowing the character to have an authentic experience, sort of allowing
Yeah.
ourselves to be in the moment. And that's a, very profound thing to do. It's scary to allow yourself to be fully present in the moment
Mhm.
because you don't know
Yeah.
what's going to happen, right?
Yeah. And I think in a way I was interested in, for me, the movie is less about, who knows what it's about. It changes all the time.
Mhm.
But I think it's about a character who finally allows himself to be in that moment of actually being open and vulnerable to something surprising happen, to have an encounter with the world and the water and the geese and
Yeah,
this park ranger,
yeah,
um, in instead of yeah, and sort of in that moment of who cares if this works is when it works, right?
right,
Of
right. Yeah,
of we kind of see him grappling with that in the conversation on the log with the park ranger, where it's, I almost got it. tasted a little bit of Nirvana, and then I lost it, and now I'm embarrassed, and oh, lots of people do it, and I'm not special, and sort
Right.
of right at that moment of I'll try that. That sounds fun. That is
Yeah.
suddenly when he
Yeah.
has this
Yeah.
encounter with himself and with the world. Yeah.
And he's able to do it finally because of his ordeal, because of wanting to connect with it, right? There's sort of first there's the call to it,
Mhm.
and then there's the facing it, the unknown, and the most extreme version is death. He nearly
Mhm.
chokes on a peanut. And then beyond that, once he has cultivated that sense of whatever it is, whether it's life, the other side, the preciousness, what however that experience is felt when it's a near death experience. When
Mhm.
you're brought back to that, you're really like, whoa, I'm here. I'm not taking anything for granted. And so that allows him to then say, okay, the hell with it, I'm gonna live,
Mhm.
and try this thing. Um, Will, how have you personally been changed, you think, since making this film?
The movie, it also came from a place where I had been um it felt a little bit like maybe treading water creatively, of either waiting until I felt like much like the character, waiting for either the perfect moment or for a idea to spring sort of fully fledged into my mind. So I think a thing that changed was just in seeing a project that was about what this project was about. This was the first project I directed that was sort of at this scale. We it was still a very, small budget thing, but were able to crowdfund and got some producers that, made the whole thing for about $10,000. So it was sort of the first thing that wasn't truly DIY, right? Where I was able to pay our crew and was able to, yeah, take a full weekend, where we could work on it together.
Oh, I
So I
get it.
think,
Yeah. It's
yeah,
big.
yeah,
It's quite a bit.
yeah. So so I think the changes being on the other side of seeing a project all the way through. Yes, I have learned to be less precious with ideas. I think when I started making Rite of Passage, in my mind, it was accompanied with the sentence, "This is the film I'm making." And I think now when I make things, it's accompanied with, "This is a film." So it's a little shift from the to where it felt a little bit like making this first big attempt reminded me that there can and will be many, many other opportunities. And that I think released a certain type of pressure or
For
anxiety
sure.
that
For
accompanied the
sure.
creative process for me.
For sure.
Um, and so I think too, I in seeing sort of a project from start to finish with Rite of Passage, I'm now, I think, better equipped to be as collaborative as I enjoy being, of sort of knowing when and how to ask for help, and when and how to let go of an old idea and favor maybe a fusion of something. Um, I think I'm I think it will be a lifelong journey as an artist, but the movie helped me sort of flex the muscle of shedding old creative ideas as I go. So I think the experience of making the movie, I left it feeling a little bit more limber and flexible creatively, instead of seeing a movie that wasn't where I started as a failure. I sort of have grown to see that as the whole point of having a seed of an idea to get started, and then the process of making a movie with so many other talented people. I mean, I think couldn't have done without, Drew Angle, the cinematographer. If I start naming names, I need to read the whole credit list, but I think a huge shout out, particularly to also to Ned Baker, who was the assistant director and in terms of finding those non-judgmental sort of uh moments of directing myself as an actor, the movie wouldn't be what it is without his little onset, you know, corrections. So I think it was, in terms of how the movie has changed me, I think I knew this, but it was sort of on a gut level or a physical feeling of the types of people I should surround myself in order for all of us collectively to make the kind of work that we want to make. Instead of feeling like, maybe a boiled down version of that is that I went into this being more, having a sort of sense of being excited about an auteur style of filmmaking, and I left it being more excited about ensemble and crew, where I sort of have, I wear a lot of different hats in this, and I have, my name is in the credits a lot, but it feels much more like an ensemble movie that is the result of the collective that made it, instead of including people who gave notes and feedback, instead of something that I kind of muscled through on my own. The times when I tried to do that were, I mean, one sort of parable or literal example, a lesson that I learned is just to ask for more help, I think. And that there was a moment where I got two crew cars stuck in this muddy field on the way to set for our big, the biggest shooting day of the film, because I didn't ask for directions. I said, I think this is the trail into the woods. And it wasn't. It was a neighbor's cornfield, and we got in trouble and we got our cars stuck in the mud. So yeah, I think
You
it's
know,
asking
you
for help.
know, Will, what I hear you saying very much parallels the film, and I hear this idea of self-reliance, which has its place, certainly, and is balanced with and complemented by an openness that invites the unknown, the ensemble, into a collaborative process. And the living of life, much like filmmaking, is a collaborative process. If you're listening to what life is communicating to you,
Mhm.
um, and you are participating with it, you are co-creating, and there's a harmony and a balance with that. And the final product of whatever it is you're experiencing, which is the most important thing, is greater than yourself. And
Mhm.
so it's interesting that, this process was of filmmaking was very much of an ordeal in
Mhm.
itself, and opening up to seeking help, to seeking input allowed you to come from a point A of idea and of course emerge in a place where it's more rich and refined with all the input. Um, so it's, just kind of another example of a life mirroring art and vice versa. Will Sonheim, thank you so much for being on Play It Forward. Really appreciate it. Everybody, till next time, we're out on Play It Forward. Bye, Will. I look forward to
All right.
more of your work. Take it easy, man.
Thanks a
Thanks
lot.
for that wave.